Migration, Democracy, Security, Rights, Professor Samir Kumar Das has contributed approximately 190 to 200 research publications and more than 15 books over his career. He is leading authority on conflict transformation, especially on how peace can sustain in ethnically divided region. Sir, we are deeply honored to have you here with us. Next, I would like to invite my co-anchor to take the stage forward.
It is now my privilege to introduce our stream discussant, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, sir. Professor Upadhyay is the UNESCO Chair Professor for Peace and Intercultural Understanding at Banaras Hindu University, also the founding director of Malvi Center for Peace Research. Professor Priyankar have also served as a visiting faculty of India's premier strategic institutions such as National Defence College and Foreign Service Institute. We have also a great pleasure in informing you all that Professor Priyankar Upadhyay has recently been awarded as one of the world's most
Norway, and associated with the several international institutions, including the London School of Economics, Brown University, and the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Our respected teacher, Anju Sharan Upadhyay ma'am, has served Banaras Hindu University for more than 4 decades and holding various important positions, including the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences, Head of the Department of Political Science, and Adjunct Professor at the Malviya Center for Peace Research. Currently, she serves as the Distinguished Professor of Public Policy at the MIT World Peace University, Pune, under the UNESCO chair. We feel greatly honored, ma'am, with your presence. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you, Ayushi.
It is now my honor to invite our second speaker, Professor Dattesh D. Parulekar, sir. He is a professor in Goa University and a respected scholar in the field of international relations and strategic studies. His research interests include global politics, maritime security, geopolitics, India's foreign policy, with particular emphasis on evolving dynamics of Indo-Pacific regions. Professor Parulekar has published widely in academic journals and edited volumes, and his work continues to contribute significantly to understand the India's strategic role in contemporary global order. We are grateful to have you, sir, here. Thank you.
Next is the youngest speaker of this panel, Dr. Ramesh Ramaswamy, sir, from Sri Lanka, University of Peradeniya, one of the country's leading institution of the higher education. Dr. Ramaswamy, sir, has been actively involved in teaching, research, academic collaboration, contributing to the discussion on social development, public policy, democratic governance, and regional issues in South Asia. Through his participation in various international seminars and conferences, he continues to engage with contemporary challenges and a scholarly debate in the region. We are delighted to welcome Sir to this plenary session. Now, to proceed, it is now time to extend a warm welcome to our respected guests by presenting them. Okay.
It is now time to once again extend a warm welcome to all our respected guests by presenting them with a bouquet and a small token of our love and appreciation. First, I would request Professor Priyankar sir to kindly come forward and present a bouquet to esteemed speaker, Professor Anju ma'am.
Next, I would like to request Professor Manoj Mishra sir to kindly come forward and present a bouquet to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Datesh D. Parulekar sir. Next, I would like to request Professor Priyankar Upadhyay sir to come forward and give a bouquet to our esteemed speaker, Ramesh Ramaswamy sir. Over to the speakers. To proceed further, now I request our chair of the session to please proceed the session. Thank you, sir.
Welcome back. It's my great honor to have been invited to chair this session, which a session of luminaries who have already been introduced to you. I'll just add one point to whatever has been said about the speakers in this panel. Professor Priyanka Upadhyay has received a very prestigious Polo Palm Award. This is an award which was instituted by Swedish Parliament and which is awarded by Swedish Research Academy. Insofar as I can remember, it has a 37-year history of awarding it to eminent scholars, and Priyankar is the first Indian to have received it. I had the opportunity of reading the citation, which says that Priyankar's leading work aligns well with Malviya Peace Research Center. So, a round of applause to Malviya Peace Research Center as well. Center for Peace Research, MCPR. Thank you very much. So, with these few words, I would like to get started. I don't want to anticipate the course of discussion here. There's no title of this session. So speakers will restrain themselves to 20-25 minutes. Will that be okay? This will be followed by comments from Professor Priyanka Upadhyay, and then we will have Q&A at the end. And I just wanted to give the panelists the chance of responding to some of them at the end, to the extent time permits us to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Das. Thanks to the Malviya Center for Peace Research for giving me this privilege of being a panelist. This morning, still morning, to talk on pedagogies to peace. I'm also grateful to them for not asking me a specific title of the presentation. The reason being that there can be pedagogies and pedagogies. Just to make clear, what is the meaning of pedagogy? The tool to impart knowledge. What I thought I'll focus on this morning was not only the tool to impart or to teach or to train, but also the tool to produce knowledge. Because unless and until there's a production of knowledge which is authentified, there is no use in inventing tools. As we know that there are various kinds of techniques to spread the truth as well as the non-truth. So what I think is of critical importance to us peace researchers and peace teachers is to know first as to what they are going to teach. So maybe the ontology or etymology of peace is also important. Along with it, the various techniques and tools through which we can invent and reinvent the teaching of peace. As you know, conflict is not a bad thing. The reason why we say that is that all living beings, all living societies, all living beings have a conflict of one kind or the other. What is wrong, what is to be avoided is the violence that comes with conflict at times if conflict is not managed peacefully. And how to avoid that conflict turning into war or violence? The ways to which we will turn today and in the next 3 days. I thought I'll talk about the feminist approaches to peace studies, but that will be restricting what we want to say. Nonetheless, yes, I'm grateful to Samir for mentioning Hannah Arendt, who was very focused on how the wars and how the violence impacts women. Coming back to it, I also would like to kind of privilege or focus or bring your attention to is that most of the times when we study violence around, we generally limit ourselves to what is happening from the top down, not what is happening at the ground. He mentioned the Manipuri women and how they exchanged vegetables amongst themselves. He also mentioned, and we have n number of examples where women across the warring line have exchanged bread and, well, not cakes, because cakes tend to get more expensive in the warring zone, and have established channels of peace. I say that not because I'm a woman. Let me confess that the year 1975, when I started my career as an assistant professor at Banaras Hindu University, was also the year when the first UN conference on Mexico in Mexico was held, which was more or less known as Towards Equality. And the Towards Equality report was released by some of us, very, very senior to us, almost 2 generations senior to us, people like Veena Majumdar, who's a very celebrated political scientist, and diagnosed how women are left behind. Still, there wasn't much talk about women and violence. Nonetheless, women's studies had started seeping into very gradually the centers of higher learning. I was actually approached to say, why don't you work on the Committee on the Status of Women? And my knee jerk reaction was, why should I study women? Only because biologically I'm a woman. And I just rejected that. And this stand continued, even to my shame, that when I worked on the emergence of Bangladesh for my PhD in the context of a theoretical understanding of the right to self determination, I essentially focused on the general poverty, general exploitation, the internal colonialism that was happening, the challenges of identity in East Pakistan, the then East Pakistan, and the violence that was being unleashed in terms of insults that were lurched on them. But despite the fact that when I was doing my graduate studies, I actually saw those pictures of those mutilated women almost every day on the newspapers, I did not turn my eye towards the plight of women. I did not care to see what the women wanted. And that is an area that I want to revisit now. Because gradually I realized that no social science, no humanities, and for that matter, no agriculture, no health studies, no technology is complete without taking into account the gender factor in it. Women respond differently to conflicts. They're not only recipients of conflicts, but they're also agents of conflict resolution. And therefore, to my mind, no study of peace can be complete without looking at the contribution or the agencyhood of women in the peace processes, starting from the cessation of hostilities down to the solutions that are offered, mostly not on the peace table because they're rarely invited on the peace tables, despite the UNSCR 1325 that resolves that every peace process should be inclusive of women as well. They are mostly ignored, they're marginalized. Despite that, they are the ones who keep looking at, okay, so now we have peace, but where are we thinking of building our schools? Where are the hospitals going to be? Where are the playgrounds that will be there? Where are the open libraries that will be there? Because they are the ones who have both sides of their brains working. They can see that, yes, bullets needs to cease, but what after that? And this is an understanding that needs to get revisited over and over again. And therefore, despite saying that in the first 10 years or 15 years of my career, I never cared to look at the women's status. Come the mid of 80s, and here at BHU, there was the setting up of the Center for Women's Studies, and we were called in by the then director of the Women's Studies Center. I wonder if anybody from the Women's Studies Center is here? Anybody who's interested in the women's studies? A couple of people there, very good. At least in a group of 180, there are two people who raise their hands. So I think three, good. So I think still we need to hone in this point again and again that women's studies is not only about women, it's about the whole society. And I firmly, firmly, firmly believe that to study gender properly, you need to have a social scientist plus understanding. You simply can't go in a silo and think that, yes, I'm working on women. It's not that PhDs then were not being done. I recall one of my seniors in the department, who was a PhD candidate, was working on women member legislators or something, something. And when she turned up to speak with Veena Majumdar, who were all members of the planning committee team, Veena said, no, go beyond that. Go, what is their socio-cultural background? What is their education? What is their contribution to the processes in the legislature? So you need to have more, you need to work doubly hard, not because you're a woman and you need to care of the home and the babies and what have you, and the in-laws, not to miss that, but basically because you can't get a full picture unless and until you have a rounded or a groundedness around that. And when did this whole feminist approach to peace processes start in an academic way? I'm aware that, yes, women did contribute in our tradition. I'm also aware that in India there was a Ardhanarishwar concept. I'm aware that there were Gargis and Maitris, there were Razia Sultanas and Rani Jhansi Ki Rani, there was Mirabai. Yes, and I'm sure so many women, and from Maharashtra, for instance, who became a global name, Savitribai Phule, and so many others. There were people who were working directly with a hands-on approach to improve the condition of women, but to highlight that that feminism intersects with the pedagogy of peace by promoting educational approaches that prioritize non-violence, gender equality, and transformative justice over militarized conflict resolution was the work of a handful of Western women. I'm not talking about Kate Friedman and Betty Reardon. I'm talking about those scholars like Elise Boulding, whom we had chances of meeting while we were teaching at Wellesley College in Connecticut, but also people who followed her. Not only about Elise Boulding, but Brigitte Utne, who shaped this field through praxis oriented teaching. So, what I'm trying to highlight here or privilege here is practice oriented teaching. As the Vice Chancellor this morning said, that the Peace Center needs to have a practice oriented center where you can train those cohorts who can go in and speak to those who are essentially looking at the possibility of resolving their conflicts peacefully, but also who might be thinking otherwise कि ज्यादा लोग आ जाओ जिससे कि समस्या का समाधान हो. So what did Elise Boulding think differently? We know she was working along with Kenneth, but we also know that she was the one who talked about peace education across disciplines. Peace education is not simply, until then, we hadn't started transdisciplinarity. Do you know the difference between interdiscipline and transdiscipline? Yes, your teachers know and they'll explain it to you. Transdisciplinarity is something in which the Peace Study Center is a big example of it. That you study a particular, concept, getting informed from all the disciplines, but that very concept becomes a whole living concept. And that is what peace studies is. Peace studies is about health, it's about poverty, it's about uh, ignorance, it's about violence, it's about urban life, and yes, of course, it's about peace. So that gets fed through various, agencies, and so Elise, who is looked upon as a pioneer of peace education across disciplines, and I'll be happy to be contradicted on this. Speakers following me, please bring up those names that can come up and we can study them and their contributions. Cultures, genders exemplifying praxis as integrating through the action for non-violent futures. So, what is it and how do we study peace? The research methodology, many a times we have talked in research methodology courses, and there have been times that feminist methodology has also been prioritized, that yes, come speak on that. And some of us have come up to say that only because you're a woman, that doesn't mean that you have to have a different methodology. But that gets corrected through what is currently known as intersectionality. You study about a segment that has various layers of disempowerment in a predominantly patriarchal society or even a matrilineal society, where the society goes by the name of your mother but remains equally disempowered. There also you have to have a thinking which is that of a disempowered person. You have biologically females, but sociologically males, about which we can talk some other time. I'm kind of putting forth the case for prioritizing women and gender as a lens to the study of peace. But here we are looking at this whole phenomena to help us understand how our knowledge remains incomplete without picking up tools on women's studies. I'll give you a very small example because I can't have a full-length presentation on how to introduce women in the study of peace. So many times we encourage our students, especially social sciences students, to not only sit and think, but go and see. Sit and think is to sit in a library and think and read and interpret, which also is a great thing. But to go and see what you are sitting and thinking, is it right? We encourage them to go to the field and they come back to say, all is well. Why? Because the women were quiet, they looked peaceful. In the feminist methodology of peace, we train them to listen to silences. There are so many narratives that we read, and we have to understand that why is it that the woman was silent? Was there something which was beyond that, which she was not even empowered to speak out? She wanted the researcher to to estimate as to what her feeling is. She wanted the researcher to then pin down. And so many times we also leave it like that because we trust the researcher's understanding to then go beyond that. So, to listen to the silences is also a technique that we need to inculcate, and that we can do only through the other knowledge that we gain. As I said, studying or adopting a feminist attitude or feminist method of peace is not simply going and figuring it out. अच्छा आपके घर में 5 महिलाएं हैं और 6 पुरुष हैं तो हम महिलाओं से इंटरव्यू लेंगे. No, it is to find out what is the real status of women in the society. Before the first panchayat elections took place, I went to Jammu and we were not really interviewing, we were visiting some of the homes where the candidates for that election were living. And we figured out that the families had actually put up women candidates there because becoming a panchayat member was important for them to get a grounded reality. But these were the women who were actually having corporate jobs from Jammu in Delhi or elsewhere, and they were being made as the faces of those families because they thought these women will be articulate enough, they will have the kind of impact that they will make. So, bringing it back again, we also will not be serving the very purpose of this 20 minutes, out of which I think I've already consumed more than 12, perhaps more than that. There are so many names now: Bell Hooks, Paulo Pedro, Brigitte Brock-Hunte, who I have already mentioned, analyzing gender specific socialization in peace education, critiquing how boys are socialized for war, and advocating women's influence on child rearing for peace. These were the alarm bells that these feminist scholars were making. When you encouraged your child to play on his or her, those device, play whatever younger colleagues would know what is known as better, those play games of war, you're actually breaking those barriers that are natural human barriers which refrain from killing and maiming. You give the shooting instruments in the hands. These are virtual instruments. You give it to them in their hands by breaking their inhibitions of killing and maiming. Unfortunately, today, when we open our smartphones in the morning, we have images of those real time damages that the warring parties are doing that unfortunately resembles very, very closely to those sites that were already fed to our children and also grandchildren in the war games or the games, video games that they played. So this is something that is to be looked at right from the time we start studying or teaching women's studies. A couple of things more: storytelling. It's a very, very important tool. I talked about Wellesley College. I taught a course on women in peace processes. That was again 15 years back. And one of the classes I started with a story wherein there is a expectant mother and the midwife is brought in to help her in the delivery. Now, this midwife is an informally trained Dalit woman who delivers a baby boy, and there's a lot of rejoicing that happens in the house. And once the delivery is over, and she hands over the baby to the mother, there is Gangajal that is sprinkled on her. On whom? On the woman who actually was delivering that baby live in the laps of that family that was celebrating the birth of the child. And the insult wasn't limited to that position. While she was leaving, there was water that was to be sprinkled on her feet so that the path which she negotiated is cleaned. So this was the story that impacted those students so much so that some of them have reverted back to me from the 15 years and asked them, is the situation of Dalit women any better? There are various narratives to that. There is no single answer again. simply because a woman is a woman and therefore she's going to be benign is probably the lazy researcher's response. One needs to study them case after case, and one needs to simply be aware that yes, this is one tool through which teaching can be done. There are other tools also. I anticipate, I hope that you all are here to learn about the pedagogies of peace, not simply to collect your certificates, but also to learn how to teach in class. Another tool is to refer to the films. There's this very small film which is getting alluded again and again, and that is on that little 6-year girl who was trapped in that small little car that received more than 370 bullet wounds or not. And her real voice is being recorded and being played. Yes, the powers probably would not allow that small little film being filmed, but it is heart wrenching to know the kind of violence that the wars can bring about. So it maims, it kills, yes, but the pain which is felt through the processes that are biologically, psychologically, socially closer to the heart of women is not same or in any way even similar to that what probably is felt on the other side of the gender divide. There are again 4 points that one would like to bring here. Cultures of Peace again. Elise published this in 2000. Building a Global Civic Culture, Education for an Independent World, and Women's Civilization and War, which was published in 2005. All these works have focused on how, if you ignore the gender dimension in the learning, researching, and teaching of peace, you probably are only imparting half knowledge. So, with this, I'm hoping and wishing that whenever we are producing something, it probably will be more complete, more comprehensive if there are gender dimensions to this study. On purpose, I haven't talked about the other gender, but when we talk about gender, I think there are other genders which are implied in it as well. You all will appreciate this is a very short period in which one can make a presentation of this magnitude as that can be possible. I'll request the Women's Study, the Peace Center to have a specific training workshop on feminist methodology for studying peace, not as feminist methodology for social sciences or humanities, but feminist methodologies for studying peace. Thank you very much once again for the time you gave me.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an edifying and insightful information. It's always interesting to listen to you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Dr. Datesh D. Parulekar, sir. I now humbly request sir to come forward and take the stage.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just past noon. At the outset, let me do the honorifics of basically thanking Professor Manoj Mishra for this very kind invitation to link up with this, what I call as the peace community here. But I also have to underscore my profound appreciation for my well-wisher, my mentor, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, and his extreme kindness and persistence in having me here. It's nostalgic for me because my last visit here was a long, long time ago. In fact, if I use the word hiatus, I would be doing injustice to the word itself because it's almost an eternity. It was 23 years ago when I just began. I just done my master's and I was here to speak, and my paper was on Nepal between the dove and the dragon. I still remember that. So it's a long time back, but always great to be in Kashi here and to be able to experience the wisdom, the enlightenment, and the knowledge. So, in the brief that I have with me, my whole conceptualization is how do we understand the construct of peace and the praxis of peace in what I call as an era of coercive and weaponized unpeace? Now, in the literature, for a long time, we have heard this acronym called VUCA, right? VUCA, where V stands for volatility, U for uncertainty, C for complexity, and A for ambiguity. And we see all of these patterns in terms of state behavior, non-state actors operating, and we see these trend lines. But within the literature of peace studies, we are now beginning to talk about unpeace. Now, what is unpeace? Unpeace is the undoing of peace or the unraveling of peace as we understood it to be by new forms of threat to peace. Now, everyone talks of traditional threats, non traditional threats, but I want to add a certain intellectual flavor to this. If you see what is happening today in terms of great power rivalry, it's not simply a throwback to ideology as we understood ideology to be. The way I would construct it, it is ideated forms of ideological competition. Why do I say so? When we taught political science and economy particularly, we said that there was something called as factor productivity: land, labor, capital, technology. All of these dimensions very much exist, but they exist in new forms. They have found mutating dimensions to them. So while we talked about, peace having to deal with issues of land and territory and territorial conflicts, today peace curriculums and peace education has to bring into it how do we foster peace when countries are making a serious stab for critical minerals like never before? Because that is taking countries to all forms of dystopian activity. When you look at capital, capital was always seen as a factor productivity. But today, peace has to factor in the fact that there is a huge capital war where the United States and China are at odds with each other as to who is going to create the foundational currency for the better part of the 21st century and maybe into the 22nd. Technology is adding a very, very different dimension to the way in which we understand peace. Because we understood peace in terms of its cut and thrust nature, in terms of its absolutist nature. But dual use technologies are now making us look at peace not as cut and thrust, not as black and white and absolute, but in terms of what I call as a straddling continuum. Peace, because today, if anyone were to ask you what is peacetime and wartime, very difficult because the lines are being blurred. There is a country right now which is at war with the world, and we know which country that is. But there is another country which is perpetuating war without actually going to war. So peace has to factor that in as well. I always keep saying that what makes China a unique actor on the world stage? It is that actor that uses state instruments to create non-state problems for peace. So, for example, we have an absolutely halcyon maritime order, but you find that when it comes to IUU fishing, anyone's heard this term, IUU fishing? Illegal, unauthorized, and unregulated fishing. Who is entering huge expanses of other countries and fishing at will? So it's my fish, but it's being stolen under my nose. Is that not a threat to peace? Is that not a threat to sustainability, livelihood? But it's not happening with any shots being fired. So this whole understanding of what is peacetime and wartime also has to undergo a change. And then you look at migration. Migration is one of the big aspects that is also hurting peace. And it's not just in terms of whether you are a refugee or whether you are internally displaced. It is about how migratory movements are happening within the overall economic system. So my argument here is that peace as a discipline has to also now embrace a broader canvas wherein we look, and exactly what Professor Anju mentioned about the intersectionality. The intersectionality has to be captured, and the essence of that intersectionality is what matters. We also have to ensure that peace is not just kept to prescriptions, right? We have been talking about how we have to ground it in realities. There has to be field validation, but there has to be performance. And I'll tell you, as somebody who actually inadvertently worked on issues of peace and conflict, in fact, my master's dissertation was a 170-page big monograph on what made Oslo fail. Israel-Palestine conflict is something that I've studied very deeply. And I had the opportunity of visiting those territories in 2009, much later. And it gave you a very different feel to understanding peace. So the argument that has always been made was what made Oslo fail? And this was the peace argument. So many peace arguments that were made was that Oslo failed because it was an unequal deal. Basically, what you were asking was one country to devolve land which they had held from the other, and the other to make a psychological commitment that I'm at peace with you. So that's the tangible and the intangible interacting with each other. Does that really create a sustainable proposition for peace? But then when you go there and you see what is happening on the ground, you see how Bethlehem is starved of water while across the fence, across the big wall, you have, Jewish communities literally wasting water of a hose pipe. You then understand how peace is impacted by things like equity, inequality, etc., etc. For a long time, we said that both communities can never make peace. And I'll tell you a very interesting story. I had I don't know what should I call it, good fortune, misfortune, whatever. But I happened to then interact with the then Hamas foreign minister. This is when Hamas was already controlling Gaza. They came to meet us because we were part of an international UN delegation. So they came to meet us. Mahmoud Zahar was this guy's name. Yale graduate, by the way. Okay. Hamas foreign minister, PhD from Yale. And he was sitting there. He saw me. He said, "Oh, you come from the land of Gandhi." I was the only Indian. Okay. He said, "Welcome." I said, "Sure." He said, "Do you have any question?" I said, "I have a cryptic question and I would appreciate a laconic answer." He said, "I'll give you what you want." I said, "What would it take for Hamas to make peace with Israel?" This was my question. I needed to know their position. A profoundly, deep answer that has stayed with me even till today. He said, "Our answer, Hamas's position is, we accept Israel's fact of existence, but we shall never accept Israel's right to exist." Brilliant answer. I mean, it was his position. He's entitled to his position. My point is, look at the way he phrased it. Now, when I put this in the peace context, it brings to the idea of compatibility versus coexistence. We often think of saying that, everything has to be compatible. For peace to sustain, there has to be compatibility. It can't. If you ask for compatibility, you are essentially asking for conformity. And conformity is going to break down at some point in time because there is a hierarchicalness to conformity. There is an asymmetricness to conformity. What you need is not conformity or compatibility, you need coexistence. And for that coexistence, you will have to get into the educational pattern where every Israeli is taught to hate a Palestinian and every Palestinian is taught to hate an Israeli. So peace education, now all of this dawns on you when you are in the region, you experience it. So there is absolutely no, replacement to feel, validation. It's also important to understand that we often have this taboo against the word coercion. Okay, so when we say something is coercive, it effectively is brute force, it's blackmail, it's everything bad about it. But peace can also be realistically brought through targeted coercion. And that is where we have to look at these frames also very differently because times change. Look at Rwanda, for instance. Again, a country that I've worked on. When the Interhamwe crisis happened in 1993-94, we know what happened between Hutus and Tutsis, how they butchered that country and slaughtered that country into atavism, 800,000 people killed in 100 days, almost, as I sometimes like to quip, at an IPL strike rate. Now, 800,000 people slaughtered 32 years ago. In 32 years, what have you seen in this Rwanda? You've seen one man, Paul Kagame, rule this country, of course, democratically elected with a 97% verdict. That tells you how greatly popular he is. Everyone understands 97% is not real. But you ask anybody in Rwanda today and they tell you that, yes, we may not have actually kind of, mended fences totally. But in 32 years, we have got development, stability, order, coexistence. So I'm willing to discount an element of coercion because that coercion to Rwanda over the last 3 decades has made Rwanda today a poster boy for the World Bank, the African Development Bank. All of them speak, you see on any index, and Rwanda is held up as a poster boy of how development should be brought. So within peace curriculum also, this idea of coercion must not be tabooed. It must be given its due. Peace must also account for power because ultimately the arbiter and currency of world affairs is power. But what happens far too many times when we are talking peace, we are talking peace in the context of the excesses of power. So all the time we are trying to explain how, excesses of power, overreach of power is then creating a challenge for peace. So peace has to almost fight against the excesses of power. Why can't peace talk a lot more about the constraints on power? Because just as there is the excesses of power, there are also constraints on power. I mean, for example, what stops President Trump from literally carpet bombing Iran altogether? Let him just do what they did to Afghanistan. Why are they being circumspect and cautious in what they're doing? There are constraints of power of all kinds. We just think of power as what matters to me, but there is a relational, agreement with power. So understand the concept of the excesses of power, the ambitions that power drives, but also temper it with an understanding that power has constraints. Telling the tale is very important, and it was wonderfully said here. Strategic communication matters, even in peace curriculums. Of course, we all remember Clash of Civilizations of Samuel Huntington, how that sparked off a huge debate about modernity, about backwardness, primitiveness, and it set off many things. It sparked off many things. But there are other notions as well. For example, when 9/11 happened, what was the first response, public response, after the state of the after his address to the nation? The next morning when he went to New York, what did George Bush say with that big megaphone in his hand? He's telling Osama bin Laden, and see, this is also an important thing. If you want crusades, I'm ready for it. This was his line. He used the word crusades. Now, get into the psychology here. An attack of 9/11, I mean, we've had attacks on India. Have you seen any Indian leader or anywhere in the world somebody going and talking about a period of time which was religious wars? After all, crusades symbolize religious wars. So, what in effect Bush is saying to Osama, I'm ready for that religious war. So bad in terms of public diplomacy, he had to be toned down by Condoleezza Rice and told him, what the hell are you talking? Because what you're doing here, Osama has sucked you in. Osama was talking about his grievances in the Middle East. By saying crusade, you are turning this into Christianity versus Islam, the very thing you should not do from a public diplomacy point of view and a national interest point of view. So the strategic communication is so very important. What you say, what you don't say is so very important. We today live in a world where multilateralism is faltering, if not in crisis. But there is collectivization. So my argument here is, when peace looks at many of these trend lines today of statecraft, there is a tendency to look at it as being totally hopeless. Whereas my clarion call is that you don't need to look at it as totally hopeless or totally helpless. You have to be able to identify some of the important nuances that are shaping. So while the world may be seeing multilateralism in crisis, collectivization is not in crisis, right? The WTO may be in crisis, but people are striking deals at the bilateral, regional, sub-regional levels. There is more and more faith. So when you're looking at peace, you can't look at peace only in terms of absolutes. There is a qualitativeness that you have to appreciate. When you look at peace concepts again, deterrence is not too far away, right? We all look at conflict, deterrence, compellence, etc. And herein you have to identify. Now just look at, for example, the Russia-Ukraine crisis. The Europeans tried to convince Putin that he shouldn't attack. Deterrence failed because he attacked Ukraine. But yet deterrence also succeeded because Putin has not gone as far as hitting any NATO country. He has ensured that all that he does is to hit Ukraine. So he also realizes that what are the limits where peace will effectively go out of the window and there's no possibility of peace. On the other side, the Europeans may have provided weapons to Ukraine, which of course means that Russia was not able to deter them, but they have not provided the weapons that allows Ukraine to hit Moscow, St. Petersburg, and deep into Russia. So my point is, these ideas of the ability of deterrence, compellence, all of this is integral to understanding peace when you're trying to understand peace from a geopolitical sense. A couple more points. So where does the Indian experience come in? During G20, we had, of course, many meetings in different states of the country. So we in Goa, small state, but Prime Minister Modi gave us 8 meetings. I had the opportunity, I was put in charge of coordinating between central government and state government. So I was part of many of the meetings. So I happened to be in one of the meetings, which was, of course, co-chaired by the ADB and Niti Ayog's CEO at that time, Amitabh Kant. And that was effectively on this concept of One Health. Now, in number 2, right, about COVID vaccines, etc. Now, please understand. Again, I come back to how we have to understand peace. If you look at immunization in terms of vaccination, which was that continent that was least vaccinated? Even at the height of vaccinations, when we had the good fortune of having a second, even a third precautionary dose, that country only saw 12% immunization. And that was Africa, right? this continent that is called the sleeping giant actually was given the rough end of the wedge. So even in peacetime, there's so much inequity. Now, in the morning, it was of course said by the chair now that we must ask this question: how certain areas which are less immunized actually manage to buck the trend. So that is different. But my point is, from a peace point of view, was their best interest guarded? It was not, because we all went by the corporate model. So peace is also sought to be delivered by the corporate model, where the Americans will tell you, you want our vaccines, you pay a price. The Chinese will tell you, and I'm giving a real example which I'm privy to, you want my vaccine? Yes, I'll give you the vaccine. If you are recognizing Taiwan first, withdraw that recognition, then I'll give it to you. This happened with Paraguay. I'm not just talking out of my head. This happened to Paraguay. Paraguay asked the Chinese for vaccines. The Chinese told them, you're one of that time 11 countries to recognize Taiwan. Withdraw recognition of Taiwan. Vaccines will be at your doorstep. They said, no way. Reached out to Taiwan. Taiwan said, we don't have. Reached out to Jaishankar. Jaishankar said, it's beyond my pay grade. I have to ask the prime minister. He influenced the prime minister and told him this is the time to send it to Paraguay. 50,000 vaccines went to Paraguay, right? My point is, the American model, corporate model, profit model, trying to bring peace. The Chinese model, corporations model, state-centric. Our model, it's not like we had a lot of vaccines with us, but the fact that we shared with 106 countries also says something. And what is that something? That something is what we also said in the ADB meeting, which is India wants to push this concept of One Health. If you want genuine peace in the world, from a health standpoint, there is no point dealing only with man-made health or animal health or plant health. Everything has to be dealt with together, because as the WHO tells us, 2/3 of the future vaccines are going to be zoonotic, and there's going to be increasing mutations, which is going to make it even more complex. So the concept of India has the potential to do this, and that's why we should, I think, be primed to not reduce our focus on peace studies, but should actually drive peace studies more and more, because this could be one of the ways to exercise your leadership in benign and benefaction ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful analysis. Now I request next speaker, Dr. Ramesh Ramaswamy, sir, to come to the dais.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by thanking Malavia Center for Peace Research, Faculty of Social Sciences, BHU, and the UNESCO Chair for organizing this important and timely seminar at BHU. And I would also like to thank Professor Manoj Kumar Misra and Professor Priyanka Upadhyaya for taking the lead in organizing this important seminar. And I think the theme of the conference is very much relevant to today's world, since we have been realizing the importance of peace. And I think in that respect, the conference has been organized at the right time when the world is facing a huge crisis or great deal of uncertainty. And I would also like to thank my colleague, my friend, Professor Ajay Kumar Yadev for his support. Without his support, I don't think I would have made it today. So I am delighted to be part of this international conference, and I am privileged to and I consider this a great privilege to share some of my thoughts with regard to peace building initiatives in Sri Lanka. So I am coming from a country which had 3 decades of civil conflict, and so I think we have been struggling with peace building since 2009. The war came to an end in 2009, which actually started in 1983. Since then, we have been struggling with peace building, reconciliation, sustainable peace, or transitional justice, and so on. Actually, the war ended in 2009, which actually brought negative peace in Sri Lanka, simply the absence of violence. So, which did not actually transform the context of the peace or the history of the peace. So, the key question is that as Sri Lanka achieved meaningful post-conflict peace building, reconciliation, or merely post-war stabilization. So, this is what I would like to address in my presentation. So the ethno-political tension in Sri Lanka between the Sinhalese majority and Tamil minority in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka started in 1983, and which actually led to great deal of militarization and securitization of ethnic minorities, and also large-scale insurgency in Tamil minority areas. Actually, the war killed, according to some of the reports published by the United Nations Human Rights Council, killed more than 60,000 people, and massive displacement, economic loss, and societal polarization, among other issues. What were the key, drivers of the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka? The first one, discriminatory policies of the successive governments, for instance, language policy, discrimination in employment opportunities, and power sharing, and political exclusion continuously, political exclusion of ethnic minorities, and economic marginalization of ethnic minorities, and the militarization in the north and east. So in my presentation, I would like to answer following questions. The nature of the post-conflict peace building in Sri Lanka, because this presentation is going to be a case study for researchers, those who are interested in peace building. So the major structural and political challenges of peace building, and the emerging opportunities for reconciliation and peace, and the lessons for global peace building practice. So I'm using two theoretical frameworks to explain the current situation in Sri Lanka. So one is liberal peace building approach proposed by Ronald Harris. One of is the leading publication. So in which he argues that the liberal peace building approach should start with institutional reforms. Building strong institutions is fundamental or crucial or critical to achieve peace. But unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, after the civil war, rather than reforming the institutions, we rushed to political stabilization, economic development, and so on. We held elections, we ensured the political participation of ethnic minorities, and we had mega development projects without considering effective government, quality of government, or governance, without ensuring rule of law, and without building administrative capacity, impartiality, and fairness in treating ethnic minorities. And also government did not reform security establishment after the end of war, all of which actually led to continuous violence, suspicion among ethnic majority and minority in Sri Lanka. And according to these three scholars, Edward Newman and Roland Paris and Oliver Richmond, they argued that the idea of peace building is like this: preventing the resumption of escalation of violent conflict in conflict-prone societies and establishing a durable and self-sustaining peace, which is not prevailing in Sri Lanka since 2009. And addressing the underlying sources of conflict, which is also not happening, and building or rebuilding peaceful social institutions, values, including respect for human rights. So there is no accountability for human rights violation in Sri Lanka. So, and building or rebuilding institutions of governance and rule of law, there has been discussion and debate since the end of war to build strong institutions and reform rule of law and so on, but these things are not happening so far. So there is a kind of acute form of peace building in Sri Lanka, which has undermined and threatened the overall peace process. And the second theoretical framework is actually Johan Galtung's violence, peace, and peace research. Actually, he argues about two kinds of peace. One is positive and negative peace. In the case of Sri Lanka, we have negative peace, which is simply absence of violence. And the government of Sri Lanka has not touched the positive peace, the aspect of positive peace, which actually closely linked with social justice, equality, and policy measures to ensure equal opportunities for ethnic minorities, and structural transformation and institutional reforms. So Sri Lanka demonstrates a kind of negative peace, but incomplete positive peace. And the classification of Joan Galtung is very relevant to Sri Lanka's current situation. The direct violence is absent right now, at least for the time being. But if you look at other two types of violence, it is those they are still structural violence is in many forms is continuing in Sri Lanka, and also cultural violence. For instance, inequality, injustice, and discrimination are on the rise in Sri Lanka even after the civil conflict. And if you look at the cultural violence in some part, especially in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka, racism, extremism, militarization, and the expansion of Buddhism is on the rise in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka. So therefore, the peace building, in order to achieve the goal of peace building, we should address three of these, violence. So now I would like to draw your attention to Sri Lanka's post-war peace building strategy. What has happened actually after the war in Sri Lanka? One is Sri Lanka has established security after the war. And the second one, Sri Lanka has paid much attention on infrastructure development rather than addressing the political grievances of ethnic minorities. And the thirdly, resettlement of large number of displaced populations and rehabilitation of former LTT combatants. So these things have happened shortly after the war. And the government, I think since 2009, the successive governments of Sri Lanka have taken some measures, institutional measures, to set up some institutional framework to address the conflict. For instance, Office for Unity and Reconciliation, National Unity and Reconciliation, to deal with peace and reconciliation, which is functioning for more than a decade now, Sri Lanka. An Office on Missing Persons to deal with the families of disappeared. And thirdly, the Office for Reparations to give compensation to the affected families. And these is the implementation. If you look at the implementation of these institutions, they are uneven. They are largely discontent on the part of ethnic minorities. And also, I can point out some of the major peace building achievements after the war: demobilization and rehabilitation. Thousands of former LTT cadres have been reintegrated with the society. And if you go to north and eastern part of Sri Lanka, war-affected areas, you can see large-scale roads, railway networks, schools have been built, and the large-scale resettlement projects have been carried out by the government, and internally displaced persons have been, settled in many parts of the north and east, but still more than 150,000 Sri Lankan refugees are still living in India. So they are unable to come to Sri Lanka, due to the prevailing situation. And we have actually held elections, periodical elections, and electoral participation has been very high in the north and east area. So all of which actually contributed to post-war political stabilization. So this actually did not address other, long-standing grievances of ethnic minorities. And if you look at the challenges of building peace in the post-conflict Sri Lanka, so I have highlighted some of the important challenges which actually prevent peace-building initiatives in post-conflict Sri Lanka. The unresolved ethno-political grievances of Tamil minorities, for instance, devolution of power. We have been talking about devolution of power and constitutional reforms for many, many years, but still there's no agreement among major political parties on how to devolve power for ethnic minorities. And the Tamils in the north and east have been demanding for autonomy for many, many years. But the response, if you look at the response from the government, which is very, very, dissatisfactory. And justice, people are demanding, even not only Sri Lankans, Tamils, even the diaspora community have been demanding accountability and justice for families of disappeared and human rights violations and war crimes that happened at the last phase of war. But there's no any progressive or meaningful response on the part of government to deal with these issues. And military has occupied a large number of, I would say, large scale of lands, civilians' lands in the north and east, and these lands have not been released by the government yet. So people are demanding, people are protesting on the streets daily, every day, demanding their lands, right to land, but there is no response on the part of government. And the militarization, even actually war ended in 2009, now it's almost 15 years. If you go to the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka, you can see large presence of military in the north and east. And they're also very influential in the civil administration. They are also holding, very important positions in the civil administration. So which has led to, kind of suspicion and uncertainty in the north and east, and which is also a key barrier for peace building in the post-war context. And this is very interesting in the north and east. I would call it Buddhicization in the north and east. So there's new Buddhist temples have been built in north and east in a large scale. So the native Tamils in the north and east are very much scared about this expansion of Buddhism in the north and east. The government has actually defrayed lands of civilians and they have built these Buddhist temples in many parts of north and east. And without political settlement, this is very important. Peace is going to be very, very fragile. And also transitional justice. Since 2015, we have been trying to ensure transitional justice for those affected by war. But there is no any meaningful development or progress in implementing the transitional justice mechanism in Sri Lanka, despite a lot of international pressure. If you look at the Human Rights Council and EU and Tamil diaspora have been continuously pressurizing the government of Sri Lanka to ensure human rights, transitional justice, and so on. But we don't see any significant improvement or progress in those lines. And the majoritarian nationalism is one of the key barrier to build peace in Sri Lanka. When we talk about separation of power, when we talk about federalism in Sri Lanka, there is a great deal of opposition on the part of Sinhalese. So the opposition comes from the idea of majoritarian nationalism, actually. So the Sri Lankan state is basically an ethnocratic state. The Sri Lankan state has been built based on the idea of singular Buddhist nationalism. So when we talk about separation of power or power devolution, self-determination, and so on, there's a great deal of opposition on the part of Buddhist monks, nationalist groups to prevent such discussions and discourse in Sri Lanka. And also the influence of nationalist movements, as I mentioned earlier, they are very powerful in Sri Lanka. So they are also a key barrier to build peace in this in the post-war context. So the post-conflict or the conflict transformation is very much problematic in Sri Lanka due to these factors. And also, if you look at the socio-economic dimensions in the post-war Sri Lanka, that is very much uneven. If you go to north and eastern part of Sri Lanka, you can see high degree of unemployment, poverty, uneven economic resource allocation, and the central control of provincial councils. We have a subnational government called provincial councils, which came into existence with the support of India in 1987. And we have a Indian model of power devolution in Sri Lanka, which is called provincial councils, and these provincial councils are largely controlled by the central governments. So therefore, the provincial council in the north and east are controlled by Tamils, but they don't have powers to implement policies and programs, which is another hurdle to build peace and reconciliation in the north and east. And economic development alone cannot substitute political reconciliation in any post-conflict societies. So I can put it differently. Although the hardware has been fixed in the post-war context in Sri Lanka, the software aspects have not been addressed in the post-conflict situation. So what is hardware in this context? Roads, large-scale development projects, bridges, railway system have been put in place. But if you look at the software aspects, people's grievances, their demands, political demands, economic demands, and so on, those demands have not been fulfilled yet. And constitutional reform, we have a new government in power after 2004 because we had a popular protest in 2022, which actually changed the government in 2024. We have a new government which never had power in Sri Lanka. So the government, not only this government, even the previous governments have been talking about constitutional reforms and also devolving power. But these things are very, very slow in Sri Lanka, due to the opposition on the part of some nationalist forces and the religious forces and so on. So the reforming the state, Sri Lankan state, is fundamental to build peace in Sri Lanka. Without reforming the nature of Sri Lankan state, without ensuring the pluralistic nature of the state and the secular nature of the state, I think it will be really a challenging task of building peace. So grassroots reconciliation is very much important, as suggested by Oliver Richmond. So strong transitional justice mechanism is missing currently, which is a kind of barrier to build peace in the post-conflict situation. Therefore, there have been a lot of discussion in Sri Lanka, setting up minority commissions, affirmative actions to make the peace building process a reality in the post-conflict situation. So, youth engagement is very much important. Youth should be engaged through peace pedagogy, which is currently missing in the Sri Lankan context. Actually, we had 3 decades of conflict in Sri Lanka, but if you look at the peace pedagogy in Sri Lanka, which is very, very poor, we haven't actually formally integrated peace pedagogy with our formal education system, which is missing in Sri Lanka. We haven't actually integrated the pedagogy, peace pedagogy with our history, with our civilization, with our social studies, and so on. So this is a kind of optional subject at the school level, which is part of civic education in Sri Lanka. Even they are not sufficiently covering peace education at the school level. Even at the universities level, we are not, considering largely on peace education. So that is actually preventing youth to actively engaging in the post-conflict peace building in Sri Lanka. Actually, youth are demanding shared identity, economic opportunity in the post-conflict situation. But that is not happening at the moment. So what actually Sri Lanka could offer, what kind of lessons Sri Lanka could offer for global peace building approach or peace pedagogy? One is the military victory does not equal sustainable peace. So ending violence is only the first stage of peace building. And secondly, development without reconciliation is insufficient. So you can build infrastructure projects, you can build, schools and other buildings, industries and so on, but without political solution, it is going to be highly impossible. And the land ownership matters a lot. Local ownership, sorry. So peace building must include community participation, as many mentioned in this morning. So the local traditions, culture should be taken into consideration in the peace building approach. So as Oliver Richmond suggested, hybrid peace building model is very much important in the developing countries. So the transitional justice remains central because without considering the accountability, we can't build peace in the post-conflict societies. And peace building is a long-term process of building institutions. Unfortunately, institutions are not built in Sri Lanka, and trust is still fragile and distorted among ethnic majority and minority, which actually preventing the peace building initiatives. So we have a new government in Sri Lanka now. So the government is called National People's Power, which came to power in 2024. What is their agenda of peace building in Sri Lanka? They are completely against the liberal peace building idea. So the argument is that the liberal peace building is undergoing a crisis of legitimacy in post-conflict society. So we can't carry on the liberal peace building idea in Sri Lanka anymore. So in many such societies, it is perceived that as ethically bankrupt, this liberal peace building idea, subject to double standards, cohesive and conditioned. So it doesn't actually consider the local dynamics, the liberal peace building idea, because the liberal peace building idea is largely tied to Western ideas, Western values and so on. It does not consider the local realities and local values and traditions. So therefore, the government is thinking of a locally driven model to deal with the long-standing issue with regard to peace building. But the government is still not clear about what kind of locally driven peace building model is they are going to implement in Sri Lanka. So with that note, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much.
So first of all, मैं आपसे सभी हमारे जो विद्यार्थी बैठे हैं उनसे प्रार्थना है कि पीस को छोड़ दीजिए। थोड़ा माइंडफुलनेस एक चीज़ होती है, उसको योग में कहिए, किसी चीज़ में, वहाँ बने रहना चाहिए। मैं देखता हूँ कि एक सबसे बड़ा अनपीसफुल जो बात की अनपीसफुलनेस, कि जिस जगह भी मैं जाता हूँ वहाँ मैं देखता हूँ कि विद्यार्थियों को छोड़ दीजिए, टीचर्स को तो छोड़ दीजिए, नहीं भी छोड़ दीजिए, बाकी आप लोग अनमाइंडफुल रहते हैं। कुछ चल रहा है, सीन चल रहा है, बी माइंडफुल। मुझे सुनने के लिए नहीं, बट आई नोटिस एंड जस्ट अ फ्रेंडली एडवाइस दैट इफ यू एवर वांट टू डू एनीथिंग, इवन वॉर एटसेट्रा, यू हैव टू बी माइंडफुल। समझ गए ना आप लेसन्स? तो ये आप सभी के लिए है, एंड आई थिंक ये चीज़ अगर आप कर लेंगे तो इस पूरे सेमिनार से ज़्यादा आपको फ़ायदेमंद होगी। तो साहब मैंने क्या किया है कि मैंने कुछ नोट्स लेने की कोशिश की इन चिंदियों में,
फिर मैं खुद इतना ज़्यादा कन्फ्यूज्ड हो गया, and I became really bewildered. And I was cursing myself that why did I go for something like easy thing like chemistry? Of course, that has a puzzle, mathematics, which has a definite methodology, a universally sufficient causal relations, explanations which nobody can question, which is people do that. Ye- So there is a problem with the language itself, and this has been highlighted eternally by even Samir raised this question, and along with his colleagues of Calcutta Research Group or Critical Theory, that why do we say peace is the absence of war? Do we ever say war is the absence of peace? In a sense, that we assume that peace is an exception, war and struggle is a constant. ये चलता रहता है, peace उसमें अपवाद है. We never say war is the absence of peace. And this actually relates to some of my very good friends, scholars, and discussions here who somehow tend to conflate international strategic studies and diplomacy with peace because they still see war as a necessary condition and something that can never be avoided. तो ये एक पजल है. अब पीस के बारे में बहुत सी बातें हुई, मैंने भी लिखा, बहुतों ने बहुत कुछ लिखा. पीस की कोई सर्वमान्य परिभाषा नहीं. सॉरी, आई एम आल्सो स्पीकिंग इन हिंदी. आई अस्यूम एवरीबडी अंडरस्टैंड्स इट, स्पेशली माय द फ्यूचर ऑफ दिस कंट्री एज वी कॉल देम, और द प्रेजेंट ऑफ दिस कंट्री. तो देखिए, कोई सर्वमान्य परिभाषा नहीं है. एक तो सबसे बड़ा ये है कि भाषा का खेल है ये. वो पीस कहते हैं, हम शांति कहते हैं. मैंडरिन में कुछ और कहते हैं, अरबिक हिब्रू में कुछ और कहते हैं. And in different phases of our human history, we have used different language and different interpretation also. शांति की परिभाषा, संस्कृत का थोड़ा बैकग्राउंड है, समझता भी हूँ. महाभारत को छोड़ के नॉर्मली वॉर के कंटेक्स्ट में शांति का इस्तेमाल हुआ ही नहीं. महाभारत में ऑफ कोर्स एक प्रसंग मिलता है, और मिलते और भी एग्जाम्पल्स हैं. I mean, I'm not here to vouch for this. But by and large, in Bharatiya Parampara, Gyan Parampara, which is unfortunately called Indian knowledge system, they want to avoid Western language and they are using a term which is typically a Western system. What is system, etc. But that's a different debate. तो हमारी परंपरा में ये ज़्यादातर इस्तेमाल हुआ है इनर पीस के सिलसिले में. दैट इज वेयर द चैलेंज इज. इनर पीस, हार्मनी, सामंजस्य. हमारे इतने बड़े विद्वान राम प्रवेश जी बैठे हैं, 3.5 घंटा लगातार आपको इस पे प्रवचन दे सकते हैं और अच्छा देंगे. इनको भी आमंत्रित करना चाहिए. मगर सोशल पीस और बियॉन्ड योरसेल्फ पीस पे बहुत कम ध्यान है. एंड दैट इज वेयर वी एक्सेल. I mean, we have one of the finest ideology, philosophy, and ethos of such preachings, such ideas, which preach us about inner peace and harmony, meditation, चाहे वो ओम शांति ओम हो, चाहे वसुधैव कुटुंबकम हो, या like whole universe. I mean, most of our prayers are, but they are mostly not, they do not visualize any opponent. What happens when there is a conflict of interest and so on and so forth. तो एक तो वो झगड़ा है. फिर पीस को लेके और भी झगड़े हैं. और ये सबसे बड़ी बात है जो उठानी चाहिए, वो ये है कि पीस हैज बिकम अनफॉर्चुनेटली मोर ए डिप्लोमेटिक ट्रेजेक्ट्री. वी यूज पीस मोर एज ए डिप्लोमेटिक वर्बिएज. भाई, आज हम आपसे सवाल पूछें कि दुनिया में सबसे बड़ा पीस मेकर कौन है, आप क्या कहेंगे? एक ही नाम आएगा आपकी जुबान में जिनका नाम हम लोग नहीं लेना चाहते हैं, है कि नहीं? 8 बार उन्होंने युद्धों में शांति करा दी. सो डील मेकिंग भी पीस हो गई. I mean, I was listening to one of my finest young colleague, and he was talking about One Health, and I was thinking it was really a great display of diplomacy, and let's call it peace diplomacy. But in terms of One Health, are we including Indians also in their condition? What are the parameters and how much Indians are faring in this One Health program, or only the outsiders do? Or, for example, just to turn it around, and that's a question to me also. Suppose it were about your, opponent, China, or somebody जिससे आपकी जानी दुश्मनी है. Should you have given those syringes and COVID medicines to them? So, this is a problem. And this is also a problem reflects in pedagogies of peace also. Pedagogy क्या होती है? कैसे हम पढ़ाते हैं? मोटा मोटी यही भाषा है. Peace को किस... So generally, peace has been taught in Indian universities. And like in Western university, it's still in the grip of international strategic studies and international relations. It's been taught as a part of it, and that begins with interstate relations. So you see, and our peace is more about communities itself, about society itself. It's about cultural violence. It's about structural violence. It is about intercommunity peace, and so on and so forth. But then, the Tesh has this question: can we do without it? Can we ignore it? Of course not. Mahatma Gandhi is gone long back. Whether he is still a father or there are many fathers now we have, but that's quite questionable. But Gandhi was of the view that one of the worst challenges to conflict and violence comes from the territorial states. And he had a point. ये हमारा है, ये तुम्हारा है. And that is where the jhagda starts. And our entire focus goes into India, Pakistan, India, China, India, Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. And still we call it Vasudev Kutumbakam. So these are paradoxes. One of the things which I always tell myself, I don't know, nobody listens to me these days, not my wonderful colleagues in MCPR also sometime, that कि भाई ये इस पजल को थोड़ा सा आप लोग देखिए कि ये जो है, तो पहले प्रेजेंटेशन में एक बात उठी, there can be, you see, a fellow UNESCO chair from Austria, he's tremendous, he has contributed quite a lot. He comes out with a framing that it's stupid to call it peace. He said, call it pieces. There is no single piece that you have. There are pieces and pieces, and these concepts also are dynamic. They change over time. And this has challenged the so-called North American, European, Eurocentric notion and the liberal, I'll also talk about liberal peace building affair. So for them, it's a shock. But then when we look back, हम लोग Indian knowledge की ओर आते हैं, भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा की ओर. So the problem is that we have completely failed to operationalize or even give any expression or case study examples to the concepts that we have. The others did. Johann Galtung, except the feminists have rejected that he is not the founding father of peace studies because he never talks about women. So Galtung died, इसका founding father का status ले लिया गया. But his most powerful trajectory and concept was structural violence, and then later on cultural violence. And he picked up those ideas I was mentioning in passing in sitting in Rajghat. So they adopted these ideas. And not only that, John Paul Lederach, those who have followed his writings, and a beautiful, contribution, and I rate him as one of the most potent and meaningful scholar from that side. Call it West, there is no typical West as such. So we have not operationalized that. We only preach, because preaching was the way these pedagogies were done. Written word bhi nahi tha, oral traditions the, shruti the, smriti the. But there is a lot that we can cull out of, elicit out of our lived-in practices. One example is what sometimes I spend time in Maharashtra, in Varkari tradition, about which Professor Datta has been speaking, and he'll talk about it. The movements, Vari, he presented me a book, I forgot to bring it. It's a beautiful example how, at the front page, there's feet of across communities, caste, anything, anybody. So in movements, Banaras itself, there was a time, of course, I dare not think about Banaras in those terms now and not anymore. But at one point, we wrote about the communal peace in Varanasi and how during the Sankat Mochan bomb blast, the Bismillah Khan खड़े हो गए, सारे Muslim और Christian tradition में inter-religious dialogue के जरिए they brought the peace. No police and force was used. So these are examples, so we need to learn to kind of put them forward. Gender factor, feminist हमारी critique है. years ago when I was doing my basics in Uppsala, I think 30 years, 40 years back, I don't remember. So there was this Ann Tickner, one of those who know about women and peace studies. She was one of the founding authors of women and peace thing. And she related, and which she wrote also, that in one of the international studies, international conference in London, she was she asked, where are the women? And people laughed at her. Women have no role in international relations. And from there, we have come to a situation of rejecting certain formulation, and unfortunately or fortunately, all the formations about the struggle for power approach, the so-called modern world, the dealer's world that we survive on. ये struggle for power है, हमको deterrence बनाने चाहिए. And how, it's such a thin line you are walking. Who doesn't know? छोटे बच्चे को पता है कि one little, even during this 4 days war, there were situations. If you think that India was in control, yes, we are a great country, we were in control. You think Pakistan was in control. So we run the risk. So deterrence is not an option. Then what do? We teach peace studies. We do peace education because believing that if the majority, the critical masses, they insist that peace is pragmatic, we want peace, then Trump would have never made a, sorry about taking his name, apologies. Trump wouldn't have made his Ministry of Defense the Ministry of War. Baat khatam. Ministry of War. And do we know that our neighboring country, Nepal, after Vidwan and Nepal, after the so-called revolution, they created a separate Ministry of Peace because they realized that, it is peace and reconciliation that is the precondition of taking the countries forward. तो साहब ये हो गया जेंडर ऑफ पीस. अंजू जी के प्रेजेंटेशन के बारे में कुछ डिस्कशन करने की हमारी क्षमता नहीं है, एंड एज इट इज शी इज बीन वर्किंग इन दिस एरिया. एंड तो दतेश जी का इज ए ब्रिलियंट, बट इट्स a typical, his trajectories combine both international security studies, deterrence philosophy, and peace studies was an onslaught against it. We don't believe that balance of power and, this coercion, unfortunately, is still not accepted in the mainstream peace studies. Peace by peaceful means. मनोज जी बताएंगे किसकी किताब है? जोहान, one of the fundamental books. And he is, महात्मा गांधी ने कहा था, of course, coercion से अगर आप सोचते हैं कि limited coercion तो वही होगा जो श्रीलंका में हो रहा है. Like limited coercion जो होता है, to what an extent it is acceptable in peace building exercises is an open question. And, we have tried it every time in Indian subcontinent, in larger world, it has not helped. But then comes the biggest puzzle. Then what works? क्या सारे लोगों को कन्विंस कर लेंगे, सब लोग शांतिमय हो जाएंगे? You need a Trump or you don't need a Trump? That is a question. But Trump is an extreme, so nobody talks about it. But can we accept even minimal level of coercion? You can have a good law and order, sir, but you cannot have vibrant peace in the system where coercion is used. I mean, I admire your new Prime Minister in Sri Lanka, who I was very happy, for one reason, that in his recent first cabinet meeting, he said all pensions to all the privileged people, all time they are gone. And even the current ministry and the cabinet and everybody, nobody is entitled to pension. Compare it with India. 5 घंटे के लिए भी आप कहीं कुछ हो गए तो आप पेंशन के हकदार हो गए. और हम लोगों की कहानी ऐसी है कि 40 साल के बाद भी पेंशन नहीं मिलती है हमको, क्योंकि जज साहब कहते हैं कि भारत सरकार के खिलाफ कैसे मुकदमा करेंगे आप. तो एनीवे प्रकारांत है, one has to ventilate, so I did. I think he is going in a direction with absolute majority, I think unprecedented number of votes that he got. And he's going in because somewhere he knows that is the trick. And that's what Samir and others have been saying through critical peace studies. More important question is the question of justice, social justice and equity. Because unless that riddle is resolved, you will not have peace. और नहीं तो ओम शांति ओम करिए. हम पुणे में यही हमारा स्ट्रगल चलता है दत्ता जी के साथ कि जब वहाँ पे पीस की बात करो तो सब लोग मेडिटेशन, योगा और सही है, मगर उससे क्या, बुद्धा को देखो ना, एक दिन घर से निकला तो उसके बाद वो अशांत हो गया। बिकॉज वन डे व्हेन यू गो आउट, you will find so much of bloodshed. What is happening in Gaza? How many of you recount that? Kalpana kariye. What is the loss? This is the most terrible time in the human history when we had. I think I have already crossed all my time and I haven't addressed to anything. Another example, in Sweden, COVID, I don't know, it relates to the discussion here or not, Samir, but in Sweden, a majority of the people did not take the shot. They did not. And they still remain happy and they are very suspicious. They called it American conspiracy, America/Chinese conspiracy. So the last thing is about the pedagogies that's very stale thing. And many of us who know, you talked about Oliver Richmond and all, we work with them, is the hybrid. There's a sense that the larger macro level liberal peace building models have failed. क्या थे मॉडल? अपने यहाँ पार्लियामेंट बना लो, महिलाओं को आज़ादी दे दो, ह्यूमन राइट्स की बात करो, प्रोसेस करो, शांति आ जाएगी. It did not happen, it does not happen. The democratic peace principle has completely failed. तो अब क्या हुआ, लोकल ले आओ. अब लोकल में हम लोगों ने 3 साल सर मारा मेघालय में. वहाँ जानतिया और जो सारी जो खासी, अजय भी हम लोगों के साथ रिसर्च में शामिल थे, यू का प्रोजेक्ट था कि भाई ट्रेडिशनल डिस्प्यूट रेजोल्यूशन की कुछ मैकेनिज्म लगाएं और उसको फिट करें साथ. मगर वहाँ भी झगड़ा है. 2 years वी आर एनामर्ड कि वहाँ नोकमा विमेन होती हैं, हु आर द लीडर, हु आर द रिजॉल्व द डिस्प्यूट. धीरे धीरे जब डिस्कवरी की तो वी गॉट टू नो कि सब वो किसी की बहन बेटियां या सिंबॉलिक, जैसे अपनी ग्राम पंचायत प्रमुख होती है उस तरह की हैं. इट इज नॉट इजी टू कंबाइन थिंग्स. पीस इज अ जर्नी ऑफ डिस्कवरी. एवरी सोसाइटी, एवरी कम्युनिटी एट एवरी पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम has to realize if they want peace, if they can do without peace and live happily, I'm very happy to give up my peace. But peace should not be like that stone in the soup. कि सूप तो कुछ और है, उसमें आपने पत्थर डाल दिया, का इससे बन गया. दिस कहानी है कि भाई सूप का सब कुछ आपने डाल दिया, वो बन जाता, लेकिन आपने एक पत्थर डाल दिया, वो कहा कि चाय बन गई या सूप बन गया. पीस शुड नॉट बी लाइक दैट. एंड दैट इज वेयर पीपल लाइक मिशेल फूको, we lost him few years ago. Brilliant. I'm no scholar. I don't have guts to read him and understand him fully. But he said it in so many words that peace is also like a coded war. He said कि जो peace है वो भी एक part of system of war है. And Michel Foucault, it's not easy to just brush him aside कि किसी ने कह दिया. And he says that it's a part of it, and he says that war is the motor behind every institution and order. Peace itself is a coded war. याद रखिएगा कि पीस के नाम पे हम लोगों को हमेशा धोखा दिया गया है. तो आप कहेंगे आप खुद ही धोखेबाज पढ़ाते हैं. और अब पीस को जब तक आप जस्टिस के साथ नहीं मिलाएंगे, इक्विटी के साथ नहीं मिलाएंगे, और जब तक कि उसका वो जो डिप्लोमेटिक और पीस से अलग नहीं करेंगे, अलग मत करिए, मगर अंदर की पीस तो अलग है ना. वन हेल्थ की आप बात करते हैं, अपने देश के अंदर की भी तो हेल्थ देखिए. निमंत्रण है कि बनारस और आपके तो पूना गोवा तो बहुत अच्छी जगह है, हमारे यहाँ क्या हाल है. So there's so much of ventilation and frustration I shared with you. As a discussant, it defines my role, but I think I used my extra time being the wonderful host that we are. And over to Samir to give some sense to what all has transpired here. Thank you.
We have time, so we will take some questions, comments, etc. So, with the permission of the organizers, we can take questions also in Hindi. And I will request Priyanka to translate them into English, particularly for our Sri Lankan guest. So I want to give the students the first chance to ask questions. And yes. So we have a cordless microphone here. So let, yes. So हिंदी इंग्लिश किसी बात का सवाल उठाइए नहीं नहीं नीचे नीचे वहाँ नहीं समझ में आया वो नीचे चलो. So I will, before you shoot your question, I will request the panelists to take down the questions. I will give them a chance at the end so that sort of they can take the questions in a composite manner and respond to them. Carry on, please.
I have got many inputs from the guys, and this is all very remarkable. But I have a question. Since I follow Khan sir, he is a great teacher. तो कभी मैं उनको सुनता रहता हूँ तो उन्होंने कहा कि युद्ध शांति का आखिरी रास्ता है, और क्योंकि मैं उनको फॉलो करता हूँ और कई बार चीज़ों को करता हूँ, तो क्या इस बारे में कुछ प्रकाश डालना आप बता सकते हैं कुछ हमें?
Thank you. We'll take all the questions and then we'll give you a chance.
Who else wants the mic? Anybody? Yeah.
So if you could introduce yourself and then ask your question or offer your comment.
My question is especially to Anja ma'am. Since ma'am, you have expressed yourself in terms of UNSCR Resolution 3025, which talks about women inclusion in the peace building and women participation in global world. So, ma'am, we read in paper that laws on paper and war on grounds, since many countries, including India as well, has not ratified for UNSCR Resolution 3025. So, what's your take, and how can you highlight this issue so that other countries and other members of United Nations organizations can accept these provisions and ratify it in their arenas? Second, ma'am, since your research has been analyzed in Bangladesh and Pakistan war, since you have researched it very well. So my question is to you is that in regards to this, since the demographic transition and the geographical separation is the way towards field, or they should have to prefer bilateral agreements can make prefer to acquire peace. So these are two questions from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is Niharika and I'm pursuing Masters from Jamia. My question is from Anju ma'am. So, you started with saying that conflict is not bad. It is the violence that comes along with it. So, I agree with the first part of the sentence, but I have a query with the second part. I feel that there is a gaze to look at violence, and I believe that gaze is necessarily that violence is something bad. But if somebody is already so low in the chain of marginalization, expecting non-violence is another kind of violence on them. So why do we want to see victims as the perfect victim, and why don't we see it from the lens of oppressed and oppression?
The lady here.
My question is to Anju ma'am, and maybe the guys could collectively think over it. So, ma'am, as you quoted about the importance of women approaches in peace studies and the conflict studies, and that should be taught very sincerely and that should be learned very sincerely. So, ma'am, what do you think that the Indian women should view peace in a global sense? Like when we are stuck between a dichotomized self of the modern rationality and a traditional emotive view of the self, especially when it comes to the woman in India, then what do you think that how should Indian women should see peace in the global world?
Thank you.
Hello, sir. Myself, Kamlesh. My question is to Ramesh that he has mentioned the key challenges that Buddhization is a key challenges of peace. So, how Buddhization of some places in Sri Lanka is challenged?
Okay. So, The question is okay. She is making him understand. All right. Um, anyone else? Then I come to the colleagues and the participants. You come to the front.
नमस्कार सर। अभी मेरा सवाल सतीश सर से है। वो भी बताया कि अपनी स्पीच में कि वो मिल के आए थे हमास के किसी लीडर से, जिन्होंने कहा था हमास का इतिहास में तो युद्ध था लेकिन वर्तमान में अब नहीं रहेगा। लेकिन सर जब भी युद्ध की बातें आती हैं प्राचीन काल से लेकर वर्तमान तक, क्यों हमेशा उस मिडिल ईस्ट से ही क्यों हमेशा आतंकवाद के या फिर युद्ध की जड़ जुड़ी रहती हैं? ऐसे अभी आप अभी आधुनिक बात करें तो जो ईरान में हुआ, इजराइल और अमेरिका मिलकर उस पर हमला कर रहे हैं, सब लोग उस हमले की निंदा कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उसके इतिहास में कोई नहीं जा रहा है कि किस तरह उन्होंने अपनी अपनी अलग फोर्स बना रखी थी। मतलब एक ईरान की एक अपनी सेना थी, लेकिन साथ साथ में अयतुल्ला अली खामनेई की उनकी पर्सनल सेना थी, जो अलग अलग देशों में, जॉर्डन में, सीरिया में, जो मेरी सियाई में सुनता हूँ, जहाँ तक मैं पढ़ पा समझ पा रहा हूँ, उन्होंने भी तो पूरी पूरी पीढ़ियों को बर्बाद किया है ना। अगर आज वो मारे जा रहे हैं तो उन्होंने उन नस्लों को बर्बाद कर दिया, और वो नस्लें अपने लोगों को बर्बाद कर रहे। तो भाई आप किसी को मारेंगे तो सामने वाला जो तो है नहीं कि नहीं हम गांधी की देश से ही है कि सामने एक गाल करेंगे दूसरा गाल कर देगा। आप देखिए ना, मतलब मेरा सवाल ये है कि उस क्षेत्र में कैसे शांति रहेगी?
भैया तुम सवाल पूछो ना।
ठीक
हो गया तुम्हारी बात समझ
Thank
में आ
you.
गई।
This is a comment, and yes, the gentleman there.
गुड आफ्टरनून सर। तो मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि पीस इज फॉर एवरीवन, तो हम आने वाली जनरेशन जो है उसको हम कैसे समझाएं कि उनके लिए पीस क्या है, और जो हमारे पेरेंट्स हैं उनको कैसे बताएं कि मतलब पीस इम्पोर्टेंट क्यों है, मतलब उनको हमें समझाना कैसे है। सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम तो ये है, एवरीवन नॉट दैट मच अवेयर अबाउट देयर राइट्स। तो हमें मतलब ये जानना है कि उनके राइट्स को कैसे बताया जाए तो सिंपल वे।
Thank you. I think that this question is meant for Priyankar. So anyone else? Okay. Oh, carry on, please.
So my question is regarding to war and conflict. My question from sir is, when we talk about peace and have harmony, I think the pressure to maintain peace is widely imposed on developed nation or on the majority. Why can't other nation which is underdeveloped or present themselves as a victim, why can't they have a teaching like they can maintain peace, but they wouldn't maintain peace, but always the developed nation is in a peer pressure to maintain peace.
The man in the man behind.
Maybe you can take another round of
I will. I will.
Morning, everyone. My name is Shreyas Pradhan, and I am from Sikkim University. My question is for Dr. Ramaswamy. I would like to ask the Sri Lankan opinion on how would you assess the Kasatiwa Island dispute between India and Sri Lanka, which sometimes is seen to be used as vote politics, sometimes by the state and central government. And I would like to know the Sri Lankan perspective on this.
No, I think that I have a fear that the panelists might forget 50% or 60% of the questions being asked, and Anju will surely forget. I will not blame her because she has a sack full of questions. So I want to give them a chance, and then if time permits, we will come back for a second round. So each speaker, I too had one or two concerns which I wanted to share with the panelists, but that will be towards the end. So we begin with Anju and then probably.
A very disobedient panel here. I was thinking this time we can go the other way around.
Okay, so
The last speaker
Ah.
first and then that way.
I don't mind, yes, we can reverse the order. So we begin with. Ah. Please.
So the first question is about Buddhism or Buddhization in Sri Lanka. So there are two things that we need to understand. One is teaching of Buddhism and the practice of Buddhism. So I did not talk anything about teaching of Buddhism because this is very important to build peace in any country because the Buddhism never actually admit violent culture. But in the case of Sri Lanka, the way the Buddhism is practiced is problematic. To show that Sri Lanka is a Buddhist nation, single Buddhist country, the successive governments, along with the support of military, they have established, plenty of Buddhist temples in the Tamil majority areas, just grabbing the lands of Tamil minorities. So that actually led to some kind of tensions and suspicion among ethnic majority and minority. So when we talk about reconciliation peace in Sri Lanka, Tamils in the north and east demand that these illegally constructed Buddhist temples should be removed from the northeast to start the dialogue or discussion on peace. So that's the issue that we have been currently encountering in Sri Lanka. And the second one is this is very politically sensitive question about Kachetibu. So there has been a discussion between Tamil Nadu government and Sri Lanka about the Kachetibu. Tamil Nadu government says that Kachetibu belongs to India, so India should take it back, and so on. But India says no, that actually was legally given to Sri Lanka, so therefore we will not give it back. So when it comes to this fishing, illegal fishing in the Sri Lankan waters, this issue becomes very very sensitive. So when Tamil Nadu fishermen come to Sri Lanka and they fishing in Sri Lankan waters, then that issue debated very seriously in Sri Lanka and India. So with regard to this Kachetibu issue, I think this is politically triggered issue. As Sri Lankans, we don't have any issue local with regard to Kachetibu. This is for political benefits, the opposition political party, ruling political party, and some of the political parties in the Tamil Nadu, they talk about on and off talk about this Kachetibu issue. But for the what is the Sri Lankans, this is not a big issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The first question, which was that is war the last road to peace? Now, let's understand one thing. As Professor Priyanka rightly said, peace is not very fashionable. War is largely mainstreamed. Now, the point we have to understand is when it comes to war, war is not simply an act. There is an entire industry behind it. There is a political economy that surrounds it. So, war is not just the manifestation of what you see. You may see Trump unleashing a war, but Trump is only the face. There's an entire industry that drives that particular war, including the war that's happening. Is there an industry that drives peace? Invariably, peace is so difficult to find and it finds a very high threshold because peace has to be driven through academia, through activism. It has to be almost ingrained in the minds of people, whereas the political consciousness is always a drift towards finding military solutions. The second point that also has to be remembered is no less than President Obama also, who many people saw as very very kind of an epitome of peace. Even when he spoke while accepting the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009, what did he say? He spoke in the very language that every American leader would speak and saying that if you want peace, you have to be prepared for war. Even as he was speaking that, but receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, he did say that. So in that sense, the corollary of peace and war is something that has been mainstream. Now the problem is, how do you extricate it from that and how do you make peace by itself an important product? How peace becomes the condition itself. Today, if you see, what kind of a world are we living in? It is stability under stress. You ask most people in the world, what do you want? They say, हमें stability चाहिए. कोई peace नहीं बोलता है. So we have settled for a particular common denominator where we say peace is utopia, right? So हमें चाहिए वो शांति, but for them शांति is stability. So even if there is a stable situation visible, they are fine with it. Now, peace also requires you to move the needle dramatically in changing things. For example, post this war right now in the Middle East, the moment there's cessation of hostility, will there be peace? There might be stability for a particular period of time. How do you bring peace to a region? That is very important. Now, connecting that with the other comment rather, yeah, I for one have been saying that look, take a look at Indonesia, for example. I think Indonesia is a wonderful example where they have not allowed religion effectively to come in the way of how they, showcase themselves. The world's most populous Muslim country, yet very small marginal population that ever got drifted towards some kind of radicalization. And I, for one, have been saying one of the big probably mistakes or misses we have had is not to drive the peace narrative for the 4 years in which you had four developing countries with some kind of civilization running the G20. Those 4 years which we had Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa, all four countries who have seen violence, structural and otherwise, all four countries with indigenous models in their own way of trying to resolve it. I think those 4 years we should have had some kind of a peace constituency in those four countries coming together and saying, this is our model of how we believe that the world should try to bring about peace and be able to overcome violence. Thank you.
Very well put. Yes, we should have had a model of peace, but I think you explained it in your answer itself that there's a huge industry that is actually feeding war. And Trump is just the face. There is a military industrial complex there. People benefit through making whatever. I mean, I can name any country, Rafales or Tomahawks or what have you. And they are the ones who have their paid lobbies. Very unfortunately, peace does not have that constituency. And the work that so many centers across the country, not only the Malviya Center, but even the center in this university that have one of our former students as an assistant professor there, or perhaps he's become an associate by now, or for that matter, Jamia Millia Islamia, or so many others who, Delhi University, who teaches one paper on conflict resolution and peace, they're trying to build this industry. But it is the money power that makes the world go around. And this money power is very short sighted. I should have my share. I don't care if there is nothing for the rest of the people. And in that sense, it is greed that motivates. And that is how we need to bring this whole phenomena to the grassroots level. That unless and until we have a change of heart, Gandhiji used to say that do not go to Satyagraha unless you have your own system permeated, unless you're prepared for Satyagraha, unless you're willing to sacrifice your own self for the sake of the larger interest of the people. And unless you have this change of mind, and that's where we value inner peace as well. Our disagreement with the inner peace is when it just starts and stops with inner peace. It needs to prepare you, to center you, to be prepared to wage a war for peace. Something like what the Vice Chancellor was talking about this morning. You'll be happy to know that in this university, in our university, when I was in the university, the peace, the security guys are addressed as not Sainiks, but Shanti Sainiks. They're supposed to, be Shantiful, and I'm told my former student and colleague Ajay keeps telling us that we tell them to engage, to negotiate, and not simply to pick up the baton and start hitting. And, small things can offend as well. If you go and park your car in the wrong place in the temple area, the Shanti Sainiks will start blowing whistles. And that can be very offensive to people who are coming from cultures where blowing a whistle is supposed to be an act of violence. So much about the area where I was not supposed to intervene, but still, since that's very important for us to understand. I think that you missed one question, and that was about the Iran issue and why is it that every conflict is focused on West Asia. You will take it later. I just hinted it that, as I said, wars at times are related to greed. not have something, or I have already, I keep mine reserved, and I go and snatch the other person's. And then I put all kinds of mulamma to it, as we call it in Hindi or Urdu. And that mulamma is that, well, you're not treating your women well, fine. They will handle it, they will agitate, they will perhaps through peaceful means come up to resolve it. And if not, if they're insecure about themselves, I'm not exonerating this country at all. I'm no expert on West Asia. But what I'm trying to understand here, that to my mind, as a political science teacher, to my mind, the basic concept is that you do not simply invade another country, make the president of that country a captive, bring him with all kinds of insults being hurled on him, and put him behind the bars, make him suffer all kinds of, unfair trials, or you don't simply invade a country and rejoice that, yes, I have killed your leader. That is something which is against the same system that the Vice Chancellor was talking about. That political scientists have actually done a great deal to the world by inventing democracies, by inventing governance issues, by inventing constitutions, that this is where we agree. And those of you who are familiar with political science would know, yes, they have been visualized. One has no historic evidence, but then it has been visualized that yes, there has to be a social contract. But this social contract to live together, to strive together, to prosper together is an issue which is negotiated and renegotiated, invented and reinvented. Quickly coming down to 1325, yes, I totally agree with you. So many sovereign nations do not want to take up international commitments that are likely to interrupt or interfere in their domestic affairs. We know in our country there are pockets where there is violence against women in a very large scale. It happens in a small scale, it gets flared up, and the patriarchy, the oppressive patriarchy, be it manifest in the armed, para security people or in the police or in the army, they then take up and take this issue up as if they have all the authority, all the liberty to be violent against women. I have myself worked on comparing India's, for lack of any other expression, northeastern region with post-conflict Nepal. And I have kind of diagnose that the status of women in a post-conflict Nepal is miles ahead as compared to the status of women in post-conflict or an ongoing conflict in the Northeast. Partly because they opened up, they invited people to train, to support, to extend aid, and we have failed. So it's not good that we haven't tried it. I'm sure there are local agencies that are working towards it, but the voices that are coming in from that region are not those very happy voices. The second question related to Indian women's view on the global world. I was wondering, why do you think that Indian women need to have a very special or unique worldview on women's issues? Women's issues are global in nature. If you think that women of India are different from the women of Nepal or Pakistan or Bangladesh or Brazil, for that matter, you probably have not had a glimpse to go and study there. I'll just bring a couplet from one of those poets from Kashmir that now has become very popular. That was so when we were studying women in peace processes, that went like this: that it doesn't matter whether beef is cooked in your house or whether pork is cooked. What she wanted, she's a middle ages poetess. Laldi is the name. She was known as Laleshwari by the Hindus and Laldi as by the Muslims. So she says that it doesn't matter what kind of meat has been cooked in your kitchen. If you're a woman, you probably will go to bed only half fed. So this is the plight of women. And if this is the plight of women, and we talked about intersectionality, Samir mentioned that, Ritesh mentioned that, we talked about intersectionality, and women, by and large, and once again, having my own caveat to it, by and large, are the people who are the most sufferers in all the systems that are still, they continue to be patriarchal. I have experienced, I wouldn't say discrimination on the basis of being a woman, but then if I study it, there have been waves of privileging women, but there have been also waves of pushing them back. Right from the freedom struggle, women were equal partners in our freedom struggle. But what happened after 1950? They were told to go back and decently raise their children and support their families. My own mother, who went to a boarding school to do her degree, was very politely encouraged, not by her in-laws, but by the society, that हो गया स्वतंत्रता मिल गई अब आराम से घर देखिए पति की केयर करिए बच्चों का ध्यान रखिए that is what your role is. And this continued till the freedom struggle happened for women in the 70s, when the reports from the status of women started pouring in after the UN resolutions, and the plight of women became so very prominent. I recall in the 80s, we had a student from Wisconsin University, I was her advisor, and I said, she was interested in women in politics, so I encouraged her to go and study the Gram Panchayat women, because I knew that there is a special slot. This was before the Panchayat regime, I mean the 77th Amendment Act had come. So she went to the village to study the role of women in the panchayats, and there were no women in the panchayats. So we were like, okay, go and ask the Pradhan and ask him, where are the so-called nominated women? The Pradhan was not even aware that there is a clause in our in the system that there has. This is before the reservation issue. Reservation clause came in, that there is that he wasn't even aware about there being a woman to be nominated if no women get selected. So the stand of Indian women, to my mind, is almost similar. Yes, there would be gradations. We have spent quite a lot of time in Scandinavia. It's supposed to be the highest in terms of indicators, in terms of women's empowerment. Yes, they are equally educated. They live longer as compared to men. All those indicators, the gender gaps are almost nil. But when it comes to the society, seldom it happens that women turn up by saying that they are that they get the equal share of housework. No, they don't. Women are battered. Believe me, they are still battered in their family homes in a country like Sweden. I worked on immigrant women in Sweden, and almost every immigrant woman, with the exception of one, responded by saying that, well, we are not allowed into the secret garden of political decisions. These political decisions are taken in our absence. So, well, Indian women, I don't know why should they be looked upon as distinct. Yes, they have been lowest in the oppressed in the lowest in the ladder. The participant from JMI, from Jamia Millia, and she talked about that women, what can they do when they are at the bottommost level? And this links me to the question on how do we teach peace to kids. I think the lessons that start very, very early in life, when you teach your infant child, yes, little toddler, yes, your teenager child, to treat men equally, to treat women equally, to treat the other gender equally, to look at the alternate narrative, to look at where justice and fairness prevails, and you teach them through various methods. And these methods, I mean, there are devices, there are methods to train children in that. There are institutions that are training them. Northern Ireland is one country where I spent quite some time. And there was a time that I was working as a research director at the United Nations University Center for Conflict Resolution, and we took the family together. Our 7-year-old one day turns up, and he talks about there being an alternate version. Whenever we make a conversation over dinner table, and I'll say this so and so is like, we had just basically 4 of us while we would talk, and I would say so and so was not very fit. And our 7-year-old would turn around and say, Mama, you think that might not be the case? There could be another narrative to that. You need to ask that person. And I was wondering, where is he getting that kind of a lesson? So yes, he was getting that lesson from school. So right from the cradle to the school, to the university, to the workplace, is the time that teaching and learning and unlearning and then learning is something that we need to go about. and it's a very common phrase, common expression, that it is wiser to sweat in peace rather than bleed in war. So there could be 2 steps forwards, 3 steps backwards, but eventually perhaps there will be some solution somewhere beyond the horizon. And we are progressing. It's not that we wouldn't be sitting so idle listening to us for such a long time if we were not agreeing that this is something valuable to learn and then to implement. So over. Thank you so much, Samira. It took longer than I thought.
Too many questions. No, I don't have to add anything. She's already covered a lot of grounds. हिंदी में एक सवाल पूछा गया था शायद ना कि बच्चों को कैसे पेरेंट्स को कन्विंस करें. Somebody had asked this question? Yes. तो बहुत छोटी सी बात है. एक लाइन का फॉर्मूला है कि बच्चों को आप पेरेंट्स बच्चों से क्या चाहते हैं बताइए. चाहते हैं अच्छा जीवन जिए हो कि सिर्फ अपनी जायदाद में बढ़ोतरी कराना चाहते हैं या इज्जत पाना चाहते हैं. वो है क्योंकि एक आपने पता नहीं सुना नहीं सुना आजकल कितना प्रचलित है, बट there still is a chain of Montessori schools. You know, in all schools actually they had this Montessori. आपने नाम सुना है इनका Montessori का? मारिया Montessori थी. उन्होंने दशकों पहले ये शुरू किया था और उन्होंने कहा था कि हम लोग पीस की बात करते हैं लेकिन हम अपने बच्चों को सिर्फ प्रतिस्पर्धा यानी कॉम्पिटिशन सिखाते हैं. This is what she said. Then she added, अगर आप Montessori schools की ट्रेनिंग देखें, there are actually number of such very good experiences, not only in Montessori but other chains, जहाँ बच्चों को पीस बिल्डिंग एक लाइफ लॉन्ग स्किल की तरह सिखाया जाता है. पीस का सिर्फ ये नहीं है कि हमको शांत रहना है या जैसा आपने कहा कि मारना पीटना है, घुस के मारना है या चढ़ के मारना है, वो नहीं है इसका मतलब. कैसे हम अपने जीवन को अपने दोस्तों से, अपने स्पाउस से, बच्चों से कैसे हम रिलेट करें, कैसे हम ईक्यू को बढ़ाएं. और मैं बार बार इस चीज को कहता हूँ कि 3-4 दशकों से 3-4 decades since we are familiar, in fact शुरू से ही कुछ पीस में जब पढ़ गए थे हम लोग विद्यार्थी जीवन से इंटरनेशनल स्टडीज छोड़ के, तो it has helped me in my personal life, in my relationships also, because it brings compassion, it also brings practical. सिर्फ ये भावनात्मक चीज नहीं है, it's an art. इससे कहते ना कि लाइफ स्किल है ये कॉन्फ्लिक्ट रेजोल्यूशन को सीखना. लंबी सांस लिए से मेडिटेशन ही नहीं, वो भी सही चलता है. तो ये मारिया मॉन्टेसरी नहीं थी. सारे जितने विचारकों हैं, सूत्र क्या है ये हम आपसे भी कहते हैं, पीस स्टडीज में भी कहते हैं कि पीस को जब तक आप एक भावात्मक उससे हटाएंगे, यानी लोगों ने कहना शुरू किया कि गांधी जी कहते थे कि जो ये कहते थे कि एक कोई गाल पे मारे तो दूसरा गाल दे दो. मैं पढ़ते पढ़ते थक गया, कहीं नहीं मिला गांधी जी ने कहा. गांधी जी ने बहुत कुछ कहा, बट इट वाज, आई एम नॉट नो फैन एंड नो भक्त ऑफ महात्मा गांधी बाय द वे. बहुत सी अच्छी बातें कही, बहुत सी उनकी अनफाउंडेड भी थी, जैसे प्लेग फैल रहा है उन्होंने कहा आपके बाप से डर, दैट काइंड ऑफ स्टफ. बट ही मेड सर्टेन पॉइंट्स कि भाई जो फॉर्चून मूवमेंट था भारत में, एक बार उन्हीं की पार्टी के लोग बहुत से दलितों को मार के आए और गांधी से जब तक आए उन्होंने कहा मुझे पता है सब कांग्रेसी होंगे. मैं तो अहिंसा की बात इसलिए करता हूँ कि मैं अगर इस देश में हिंसा की बात करूं तो यहाँ कितना युद्ध और मारपीट शुरू हो जाएगी, इतनी जातियां, इतने धर्म है. भैया बात ये है कि पीस स्टडीज को एक लाइफ लॉन्ग स्किल की तरह अगर आप बच्चों को पढ़ा सकें और उनको कंपटीशन की जगह कोलैबोरेशन का मन. ये काम क्यों कर रहे हैं सब? उनके पास खुद इतना तेल है कि अभी दुनिया को 200 साल दे सकते हैं. लालच, ग्रीड, एज वाज मेंशन्ड, लालच है, ग्रीड है उनमें, more. And that is the generic cause. Conflict resolution is about going to the generic causes of the conflict. We live in a world which is unnecessarily, which is killing earth, killing planet, killing climate, because we want to. हमारे गांधी बाबा ने क्या कहा था? सही ना कि भाई दुनिया में पृथ्वी ने बहुत दिया है संसाधन. अर्थ हैज प्रोड्यूस इनफ फॉर एवरीबॉडीज, नॉट फॉर ग्रीड. उस ग्रीड को हम बढ़ाते हैं. अब करना है बेटा, नीट निकालना है, आईएएस निकालना है. आईएएस में इसलिए नहीं कि आपको सेवा करनी है, फ्री साधन और संसाधन मिलेंगे, सॉरी अबाउट दिस. तो जब ये आप एज ए पेरेंट, आप पेरेंट हो गए कि नहीं अभी? जब बने तो इसका ध्यान रखें कि बच्चों को उनकी सुरक्षा के लिए, उनके अच्छे जीवन के लिए
आदर्श की तरह मत बताइए, पीस को बताइए, पीस प्रैग्मेटिक है। मुझको डर लगता है, मैंने इंटरनेशनल सिक्योरिटी स्टडीज बहुत पढ़ी है, यहाँ कल्पना नहीं कर सकते। मैं मानद प्रोफेसर हूँ नेशनल एयरफोर्स एकेडमी यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स में कई वर्षों से, मैं जानता हूँ, लेकिन बहुत खतरे की रास्ता है वो, कि मार दो, घुस के और पटक दो और न्यूक्लियर बम फटा। 15,000 से ज्यादा है, चलिए उस विषय पे नहीं जाएंगे। तो भैया पीस प्रैग्मेटिक चीज है, एक लाइफ लॉन्ग स्किल है, उसको उसी तरह से हमको देखना चाहिए। दूसरा, डिग्निटी आती है। एक चीज, एक कंसेप्ट जो नहीं मेंशन किया हम लोगों ने, श्रीलंका के केस में, माय कलीग फ्रॉम श्रीलंका, that we had Peter Wallenstein in one of those conferences recently, 2, 3 years back, and he talked about that what Sri Lanka needs is a quality peace, more of dignity to your, which this government probably in course will do. तो dignity आनी चाहिए। आपने हमको, आपको दया नहीं करनी है। टॉलरेट भी, टॉलरेट क्या होता है? हम दया कर रहे हैं। बहुत कुछ समय लिया हमारे अध्यक्ष महोदय के पास, बहुत समय बचा भी नहीं है, but we need to hear him, and thank you so much.
So, is there any other question, or should we have one more round? Yes, there is just one. No, I have already done it. So I see two hands being raised. So two hands being raised. So these two questions, and then we will pull down the shutters.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is to Datesh, sir. Sir, Datesh. Yes, sir. So you talked about targeted coercion. So my question is that in a world where war is increasingly normalized and peace is often considered as utopian, can we say that can stability achieved through targeted coercion can be regarded as a new model of peace? And if yes, till what extent is it valid or reliable? Thank you. आपका नाम बताते जाइए ना। ज्ञानश्री सिंह, वसंता कॉलेज फॉर वुमेन।
You are a good candidate.
गुड आफ्टरनून टू ऑल ऑफ यू। मैं शेयर के साथ शुरू करना चाहता हूँ। साहिर लुधियानवी जी ने कहा था कि जंग तो खुद ही एक मसला है, जंग क्या मसलों का हल देगा। एंड माय क्वेश्चन इज, beginning from a philosophical context, I believe the world is only our reflection, and any externality is the consequences of our internal shifts and situations. Likewise, any conflict, any war, whether Cold War or violence based, ultimately led to either disruption, collapse, or ceasefire. I feel ceasefire is never a permanent solution to any war. Rather, it is just a temporary pause, settlement. And every country is facing ethical crisis. So, what may be the actual tools that can really bring the revolutionary transformation in every citizen's mindset that may lead to ultimate peace from basic to advanced level? Recent example of India Park Operation Sindoor.
Your question, you will have question. So I So I think that it was a very interesting session and a great learning experience for me. But I have, to the extent time permits me, I will have two or three concerns which I would like to share with the panelists, and maybe that uh, our discussion will roll into lunch as well. I think one of the takeaways was Anju's question that how does one read silence. Now, silence is not necessarily gendered. It can be, for instance, a male voice which is could have been articulated but is silenced. Um, I just want to make one point which I find important is this, that it's not a binary between silence and voice. But you have between silence, complete silence, and articulated voice. For instance, screams, cries, for instance. And how does one make sense of those screams, cries, uh, expressions of anger, etc., etc.? I remember, uh, for instance, the famous short story of Toba Tek Singh. Manto, I have not read it in Urdu because I don't know. I have read it in translation where, for instance, here is a man, his real name was Bishan Singh, if you can remember, but he used to be called Toba Tek Singh because that's the name of his village uh, that he could only mutter. So he stood on the line that separates India from Pakistan throughout the night. He was quote unquote a lunatic is not a politically correct word, but that's the word which Manto used at that point of time. And he was to be handed over to the Indian authorities. But then you know that with a scream, he fell down, and I want to remember desperately Manto's words because these are irreplaceable. Half of his torso was in India and half in Pakistan. Uh, Very symbolic, but you know that how does one make sense of the scream? Uh, Scream is the word which Manto has used. That there were two doors, and and Toba Tek Singh refused to enter either of them, and that's the expression of the scream uh, which he articulated. In fact, Gayatri Spivak has written on it that how does one make sense of silence and various articulations between complete voice and complete silence. That's my first point. I think that it's a very important point and uh, which we need to grapple with. The second point is that you know that we talk about social justice and peace, but you know that the relationship between social justice and peace is very complex in the sense that if you ask for social justice, you may be required to disturb peace. That is the sort of cat and mouse situation. Um, and that's the reason why Sri Lankan paper becomes relevant because it makes a distinction between post conflict, quote unquote, peace. I would describe it as pacification and peace. There is a distinction between them. And Priyankar was referring constantly to our works. The 4 volume South Asian Peace Studies actually came between 2004 and 2009. And we wanted to bring the question of quality of peace upfront, in the sense that you have peace in crematoriums, but that's not the peace that we are talking about. So that's my second question. That the relationship is very complex. So it's not that in other words, in our journey to social justice, to acquire to secure social justice, maybe that we may be compelled to disturb peace. But how much of peace could be disturbed? Honorable Vice Chancellor actually referred to the importance of dialogue. But how can that dialogue be held in a typically asymmetrical situation? In fact, the question was raised by someone. I don't have any answer, but I'm just sort of posing these questions. The final point is about the question of targeted violence, targeted coercion that Dattesh was referring to. Now, you know that essentially the idea of targeted coercion is derived from the understanding of balance of power. So, if there is a balance of power between X and Y, then there will not be any violence or conflict, uh, overt conflict, so to say. For those who have not read international relations, I have not read international relations. Uh, the idea is very simple that if I strike you first, and you have the power to absorb the strike, A, and B, you have also the power to massively retaliate, then in all probability, I will not strike you first. That's basically the cut and dried substance of the idea of balance of power. And I think that in that context, targeted violence might play an important role. But targeted violence, targeted coercion has actually two problems. One problem is this that uh, the quality of peace, because you know that there is peace, but peace is always haunted by the specter of war. It's actually knocking at the door. Uh, so it postpones war instead of preventing it. It doesn't prevent, it postpones. See how fragile, for instance, Cold War peace was. The second reason why I have some reservations about targeted coercion is this that balance of power always assumes that conflict is confined to two conflicting parties. And so peace must be established between the conflicting parties. That's it. But the concern that Anju raises is that what about women? Aren't they stakeholders, even if they are not directly involved in conflict? So I give you one example, and there I will end. I know that I'm standing between you and lunch. So and this is an ethnography which I have conducted on Manipur. You know that this story alludes to a childless couple, and the husband is a Meitei. I'm sorry, the husband is a Kuki, and the wife is a Meitei. Those of you who have some knowledge of what has been happening in Manipur, it's the backyard of beyond. But then we'll know that Meiteis and the Kukis have been involved in conflict for the past 2-3 years, 3 years in fact, close to 3 years. So this is a childless couple. It's a bi-ethnic couple belonging to two ethnic communities. So they run an orphanage where children of all ethnic communities, Nepalese, Meiteis, Kukis, Nagas, etc., stay. When the conflict broke out in 2023, the insurgent groups of both the Meiteis and the Kukis, they came and they threatened that you must shut it down because this cannot go on. And the couple felt threatened because they had all the multi-ethnic children with them. They were at a loss and they decided to shut it down. But then the villagers came. And the villagers, they said that nothing doing, you cannot touch this orphanage without killing us. And the orphanage was spared. Now, see, here is a stakeholder which is not directly involved in conflict. So, peace has many constituencies, peace has many stakeholders. Do not think that two parties, they apas mein, they come to an understanding and they say that peace prevails. This might not be peace to many of us. Thank you very much for your questions. Yes.
Yeah, so I'll just respond to that question. Again, fabulous, intervention by the chair. So the argument I was making was, is when we say targeted coercion or coercive peace, in that sense, all coercive peace need not be manifestations of violence. In terms of responses, there are a broad continuum of responses which we call operations other than war, for instance. Now, if we take all targeted coercion to be violence, then how do we essentially categorize Chapter 7 of the United Nations? Chapter 7 of the United Nations, which is essentially coercive action peace enforcement, says that when all pacific settlement dispute mechanisms are over from section Article 38, 33, 38, then 39 onwards, it is all coercive action. But why do we consider Chapter 7 not as state terrorism, for instance? Because the United Nations has been understood to be a repository of legitimacy. So when the United Nations instrumentalizes something, which is in Article 7, it is a form of targeted coercion itself. And many times it is done with the object of changing state behavior, because state behavior, unless it is changed, all other things can't follow. Now, let me give you one example. Liberia. Liberia used to be in the 1990s under a self-styled military dictator, Charles Taylor. And Charles Taylor had used Liberia as a launching pad for war in neighboring Sierra Leone and Ivory Coast, etc. There was targeted coercion, not in terms of killing him or in terms of violence. It was recognized that until he leaves the country and moves out, nothing will change in Liberia. So there was targeted coercion in the form of threat of use of force used against Charles Taylor. He exits on an amnesty. What follows after that is something very salutary, not just for West Africa, but all of Africa. You have Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who then goes on to become the president of Liberia. She rules for two terms, and interestingly leaves power, something which no African leader has done. And today, if you see the progression of Liberia, one wonders, had that targeted coercion not been applied at that point in time, would peace have got a chance in Liberia, or would Liberia have got a chance to come to where they are today? So my argument was, it needs to be targeted, applied, and it needs to be understood in peace studies, not as a kind of a brute force or overwhelming force, but a potential response mechanism for the larger peace to be obtained. Thank you.
Now, Now, I would like to request our respected professors, Professor Manoj sir, Professor Ajay sir, and Professor Prashant sir, to kindly come forward and present a memento to our esteemed speakers, Dr. Datesh, Professor Anju Charan ma'am, and Dr. Ramesh Ramaswamy. I kindly invite Dr. Sunita ma'am to please come on stage. On behalf of the organizing committee, it is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks for this enriching plenary session. First and foremost, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Samir Kumar Das for chairing this session and guiding the discussion with his insightful observation and intellectual leadership. I would also like to sincerely thank Professor Priyankar Upadhyay sir, our discussant, for this thoughtful reflection and for engaging critically with the ideas presented during the session. Our deepest appreciation goes to our distinguished speakers, Professor Anju Sharan ma'am, Dr. Datesh, and Dr. Ramesh Ramaswamy. Your illuminating presence has provided us with valuable perspective. Finally, I would like to thank all the participants and scholars present over here today. Now we have a lunch break and we will again gather after the lunch session. Thank you.